Russia and Saudi Arabia clash in the Middle East over the prices of oil. Venezuela takes a huge hit of embarrassment on the world stage. Plagues of locusts swarm in the Middle East and the Horn of Africa, and coronavirus continues to disrupt the world economy. We are Politics 1001.
Politics 1001. The world at large.
What's going on, everybody?
Hello.
How are you all doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing very good. My name is Josh.
My name is Ian.
And we are extremely excited to be here with
So
you today
excited.
because we have so much to talk about.
So much.
Yeah, so much. So much geopolitical tension, as per usual.
My favorite.
Oh yeah, that's what we're all about here on Politics 1001. And before we start, we are, if you don't know us, a page on Instagram. You can search us up, Politics 1001.
Yep.
And
That's us.
and our different platforms are YouTube. We have a Spotify now,
Ooh,
which is
new.
absolutely amazing. So if you want to actually download and listen to us on the road, you are more than welcome to do that.
We won't stop you.
No, we won't, because we love when you guys listen to this and give us feedback, because feedback is what makes this better.
This is true.
All right, so we don't want to talk too much. Let's just jump right into this.
All right. So, Josh, the Russia-Saudi oil war. I have no idea this is going on. I've been in quarantine. I have no idea about this, so explain away.
Absolutely, Ian. Russia and Saudi Arabia are fighting. And this is actually quite rare. Usually these two tend to get along through
Really?
OPEC, which, if you don't know what that is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries.
Wow.
And Saudi Arabia is the leader of OPEC, and Russia, though not an official member, is usually signs deals with OPEC to essentially control global oil prices. And Saudi Arabia and Russia have been sparring over this, because Russia is deciding, you know what, maybe I don't have to listen to OPEC. Maybe I can go off on my own. And the reason for this is because of coronavirus. Russia is essentially taking advantage of the coronavirus issue because since countries like China and Vietnam, like big factory countries, are shutting down, oil is not as needed. It's not as prevalent because the demand is just lower because factories are literally not functioning. And that affects the price of oil because it no longer becomes as valuable. That means the supply is the same, but there is a lower demand. And so that's where Russia comes in, because they realize this and they know that oil prices are going to get cut and they're taking advantage of it. Right. And so Saudi Arabia, Ian, is essentially saying to Russia, you need to cut your oil production so that the prices stay the same. But Russia, being Russia, doesn't want to do that because they are facing crippling sanctions from the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, because they're no longer part of the EU.
That's tough.
And Russia is essentially saying, nope, we're done. We're not going to listen to OPEC as much. And they see this as an opportunity to expand their oil exports by providing cheaper oil because, again, oil doesn't have to cost as much.
Right.
Because there's so much of it, but there's not as much going around. And so they can... And so the issue here for Saudi Arabia is that Saudi Arabia actually relies on oil to function their economy. And so when oil is cheaper, all of a sudden it's much, much harder for them to function because they don't have as much spending money, because oil makes up 42% of their GDP and over 90% of their export earnings. Because Saudi Arabia, if you couldn't guess, it tends to be a very dry country.
Yep.
So they don't have much to export besides oil. And so their export earnings literally revolves around exporting crude oil. And so when the price goes down of oil, which is 90% of their exports, it presents an issue for the lavish spending of the Saudi royal family. Saudi Arabia, they're not happy about this. And Russia, they're going off on their own. They want to make oil prices lower, and they're actually trying to steal Saudi Arabia's clients by providing cheaper oil than Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia cannot afford this. So they're furious. Russia's going against the OPEC agreements that they signed because, again, the point of OPEC is to regulate the price of oil. because if because OPEC regulates about 75% of the world's oil. So whatever they decide is pretty much how it goes. And so Saudi Arabia was angry, and they have pledged to increase oil production despite it hurting the prices of their oil because they are desperate and they want to hold on to their clientele. Right. So in the short, when looking at this from a Western point of view, this doesn't make sense. Why would Saudi Arabia increase the production of oil? That means there's more oil when there's less demand than ever. So the prices of oil would go down.
Right. Simple supply and demand.
So Saudi Arabia doesn't have as much. The prices of oil is going to go down because Russia is trying to produce more oil, and Saudi Arabia is saying, we're going to produce more than you, even though that actually hurts the price of oil and hence hurts their economy. So why would Saudi Arabia do this?
I don't know.
So
I'm no economist. Economist? Economist. That's the word.
Like the magazine. And so Saudi Arabia is decreasing the prices of their oil by producing more because they're so desperate to hold on to their clientele. Right. Russia is threatening to steal all of Saudi's clients by providing tons of oil that Saudi Arabia needs to match because because Russia has so much oil, they can make the prices cheaper. And Saudi Arabia is essentially saying, look, we can't afford for this oil to be lower, but what we can't afford even more is losing our clients. Right. So they're fighting with Russia to produce all this oil, but this has actually created a huge surplus of oil, and we don't know what to do with this. So countries like the United...
I'll take it.
You think, but the United States is getting hurt by this too.
Really?
Yeah, because the goal of Saudi Arabia and Russia, despite the fact that they're fighting, is to counter U.S. energy production, because the United States has become a huge exporter of energy recently. Yeah. And so they all have that common goal of constantly countering the United States. Yeah. And so countries that are getting hurt by this because the price of oil is lower are countries like the U.S., like Russia, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, like Oman, like all the Gulf states in the Middle East. It's huge, and it's hurting the world economy because Saudi Arabia is refusing to negotiate because, again, they need the money from the oil, and they're very desperate. And they want to hurt the Russian economy by lowering oil prices, and they want to force Russia to the negotiating table because Russia, their economy tends to not do so well. It shrinks. They're going through population decline.
Really?
Putin's doing some fishy stuff with the Russian constitution. So
I saw that.
Yeah, so Russia is not the most trustworthy country right now. But Russia, they obviously started this by moving away from OPEC. And so why did they do this? Russia has much larger gold reserves. So even if the price of oil goes down and there's a lot of inflation because the Russian ruble is a terrible currency, but even if there is inflation, it doesn't matter because gold has a set value. Yeah. So they have more gold. They obviously have a larger economy than Saudi Arabia. It's like 1.4 trillion versus 750 billion from Saudi Arabia. And they have a much more diversified economy. Saudi Arabia relies mostly on oil for their economy, whereas oil is only 20% of the Russian economy. Right. So
this was all started because of coronavirus?
So Russia is taking advantage of coronavirus, right? Because, again, the factories in China are no longer requiring any oil because they're not functioning. Yeah. Because coronavirus, everyone has to stay in their house. And so...
Including us.
Yep. We are stuck in our house, too.
We don't live together, though.
Yeah, but the ironic part of this is that countries like China and Japan and South Korea are the ones that are actually benefiting from this because oil is cheaper now. So so the clientele that is China is actually benefiting a lot from this. These two countries fighting each other over oil because they purchase oil and Saudi Arabia produces it. So this is hurting a lot Russian-Saudi relations because Russia can obviously easily move towards Iran, which is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia despises Iran. They don't want to be friends with Iran. And just by this going on, it's definitely it's going to shift the balance of power from Saudi Arabia to Iran if Russia decides to move closer to Iran, which they're already doing a lot. You see that in Syria against Turkey. And so this is definitely a very delicate balance, and Saudi Arabia is trying desperately to hold on to their power and leverage in the Middle East through oil, because that's what makes Saudi Arabia so powerful. Without oil, there's not much going for them.
Oh, that's kind of sad. They have sand.
They do have sand. I guess sand's kind of nice.
Oh, it's coarse and rough, and it gets everywhere.
Yeah, but it feels good if it's cold out. Which it does get cold out in Saudi Arabia a lot.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of people think it's just always hot there, but it can get cold
Including
sometimes.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
It is hot most of the year. So that's what's going on in Saudi Arabia and Russia. Oil is obviously a huge issue. It has been for the past 150 years.
Yeah.
Countries,
Oil.
Yeah, oil. Every world power fights over it. And
Yeah.
we are going to be running out of it in around 50 years. That's what most people estimate. So Saudi Arabia is going to need to figure something out.
They've been saying we're going to run out of oil since 50 years ago. Peak oil. So will we? Will we not? I don't know.
Well, yeah, and that's another debate, right? Because we, as their population grows, we are consuming more oil, and oil takes millions of years to create. So we're definitely using more than what we have, but we could always find more reserves. And as the polar ice caps melt, sad as that is, we see all these animals drowning, and our water supply.
I miss the polar bears.
But there's a lot of oil under them. So
oils or polar bears? You choose.
You can choose. Yeah. Nice. Okay, so that is extremely interesting, and we're going to be moving on to another oil power, that is Venezuela.
Ooh.
Venezuela is actually said to have one of the largest oil reserves in the world, but we're not going to be talking about their oil reserves. We're going to be talking about the absolute slap in the face that Venezuela took recently with the...
Literally or figuratively?
I would say a little bit of both.
Really?
I would say Venezuela, through those sanctions, they're definitely taking a physical slap also. But I guess in this case, we'll go with figuratively, right? No one's smacking.
Except me.
Ian slaps Venezuela. And so,
all the time.
Yep. And so, the International Monetary Fund. That is or abbreviated IMF, that's what we're going to call it for this video. And it is a group of 189 countries headquartered in Washington, D.C., so obviously they're already anti-Venezuela, with the task of helping countries around the world achieve financial stability. So essentially they give out loans if your country is going through a rough time. And Venezuela recently has decided, we're going to take advantage of this. Like, we're part of the IMF. And so they request a loan of $5 billion from the IMF to help fight the coronavirus. And this is the first time a country has actually requested help fighting the coronavirus, because basic medicines like Benadryl and Advil, that you just can't find them in Venezuela.
Right.
So, coronavirus, that's a whole separate issue. That's going to be hard. And so, the IMF decides to reject this emergency request because they do not think Nicolas Maduro is a legitimate ruler of Venezuela.
Yep. They recognize the other guy.
Yeah, Juan Guaido is the man going around the world on his little tour, advocating for freedom in Venezuela. So, we're going to read a little quote from the International Monetary Fund. They said specifically, in a statement, "Unfortunately, the fund is not in a position to consider this request. As we have mentioned before, IMF engagement with member countries is predicated on official government recognition by the international community. As reflected in IMF's membership, there is no clarity of recognition at this time." So, that is a huge slap in the face to Nicolas Maduro and the Venezuelan regime. Essentially, the IMF is saying, you are not legitimate, so we are not going to give you money.
When you use the word predicated in a statement, you know it's legit.
This is what I was thinking. I thought it said predicted at first. I had to read over a few times.
Dyslexic.
Yeah, well, Ian is dyslexic. Wow. You just wanted me to say that.
No, I didn't.
Oh. Okay, Ian. No, you didn't hear that. So, slap in the face to Venezuela. That must hurt. Imagine being the ruler of a country, and you're requesting a loan from an organization that you are a part of, and then they say no, because we don't recognize you. Maduro is probably a little sad right now. He's probably a little angry, because he was essentially called illegitimate by an organization that's supposed to help countries in situations like his own, with a dying economy that is Venezuela, over a 90% poverty rate. There's rapid inflation. It's just an awful country. In terms of their economic policies. Yeah. And so this is what they said, right? They don't think Maduro is legitimate, is a legitimate ruler, but personally, I think there's more to that. I think the IMF could make exceptions, like they could still send the loan, because obviously coronavirus won't affect the government, it'll affect the people.
Right.
So there must be more to that. So there is. The real question is, can they be trusted with $5 billion? Venezuela is going through rapid inflation. The way they're able to keep up with all their debts is by constantly turning in their gold reserves. They had some of the largest gold reserves in the world about 5 years ago with about a 10% poverty rate, and they have sold a ton of gold, and their poverty rate's over 90%. So it's gone downhill. And so they're saying, how can we trust Venezuela with $5 billion when they can't even, keep their gold to themselves? The government might spend, it's obviously very corrupt. The government is centered, the money is all centered around the single regime in Caracas, and they lavishly spend on the military, and they spend on themselves and all the homes that Maduro has. So it's a lot. And also, Venezuela is very, non-specific with this. What does it mean to fight coronavirus? When you send a request like that, how are you going to fight it? What are you going to do?
Do they mean tanks or doctors?
Exactly. So there's so much going on right now. Venezuela is really not in a position to negotiate. Coronavirus is going to hit them hard. We see it starting to pop up in South America slowly. But it is going to pop up. It's starting to come in Chile. They've closed down all cruises coming to Chile. So,
I was really looking forward for a Chilean cruise.
So, Ian,
has Greenland been affected yet?
Greenland? That is a great question, Ian. Greenland has not been affected yet. I am very, very, very sorry about that. So, again, if there are Greenland folks out there,
I'm still cheering for them.
Yeah, I know. So, up next, we're going to jump into the plague that is going around. Or not plague, but I guess it could be considered a plague from biblical perspectives.
And we are not talking about coronavirus or corona beer. We are talking about a plague of locusts.
Exactly. Okay, so the Middle East and East Africa are going through a lot right now. Yeah. They are being ravaged. All their crops are being ravaged by the desert locust. This is the same locust that was in the Bible, and it is the locust that is causing all these problems because it is considered by most farmers as the worst type of locust. It eats the crops.
The desert locust.
Yep, it eats them really fast. It is absolutely so destructive, and it's absolutely terrible.
They reproduce pretty fast too.
As do most bugs.
Yeah.
And they're plaguing East Africa. Tons of crops are eaten every day. They leave nothing in their past, and around the Jewish holiday of Passover, they're expected to really make their mark known in the Middle East as well.
But they're not expected to hit Israel hard, from my understanding of it.
Nope. So they're going to avoid the Levant. So countries like Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan are most likely not going to be hit by this.
But Iran, India, I believe, Pakistan, they'll be hit hard.
Yep.
Along with all the countries around the Horn of Africa.
Yep, which is really bad, because especially in India, because it's so densely populated and most people there live on these farmers. So, China decided to jump in a little bit. Yeah. And they're suggesting many different ways to handle this. China obviously has their own incentives. They want more presence in these countries. China's always looking for a way to get themselves more known. Yeah. So, they decide, why not send ducks? And so they've
proposed to send 10,000 ducks to the Horn of Africa because ducks eat locusts.
Yep. And so against the millions of locusts, there are 10 ducks.
Yeah.
10,000 ducks.
10,000.
And
quack, quack.
Yep. And so I guess.
Watch out.
Was that? Do you know if that was accepted? Are they sending ducks?
Right now, I think they proposed it, but they're not really sure if it's going to work, because is it really practical to get 10,000 ducks and just land them in a Horn of Africa in these countries that don't really know what's going on? They'll be like, why are there 10,000 ducks quacking around in Africa?
And even more, like, if people are starving and they don't have any crops, they might get a little hungry when they see a duck.
That's true.
So,
oh my God.
I don't know. I mean, when
the sad thing is these countries are countries that are literally starving right now.
Yeah, so countries like Djibouti and Ethiopia and Somalia, these are all very poor countries in Africa, especially Somalia and Djibouti. They rely mostly on agriculture. That's how most people there make their living. Not so much in Saudi Arabia, because again, there's not that much agriculture there. It's mostly oil. In the Gulf states, same as them. But India and Pakistan, most people live in rural communities, and they farm, and that's how they make most of their money. And so it's just very, very bad, because these locusts are just taking all of it. So there are some biblical implications going on with this. if you haven't heard of the Locusts, this was the 8th plague when Moses was trying to escape Egypt and free the Jewish people from being slaves under the Egyptian Pharaoh, Pharaoh Ramses, I believe, and they all try to escape, and so God sent 10 plagues, and the 8th one was locusts that ate up all the crops and starved the Egyptian people. So that's something we see going on here, and many religious people are freaking out about this because, especially people in the Middle East, because they tend to be very religious themselves, and in India tend to be religious, though it's a different script. So, but still, we're going off the Bible here. Revelation 6:8. I'm just going to read this to you, Ian. This is exactly what it says in Revelation 6:8. And this is what most people are referring to when they're saying, "Oh, I'm freaking out about the locusts." And I quote, "I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth."
So, is that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse?
Yes, it is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so...
Bible.
Yeah, you know the Bible, Ian. So this is what is freaking people out. Pestilence, famine, and sword. If we look about the year 2020, it's been a pretty terrible year for the earth as a whole. There's been disease, and obviously famine, and of course violence. So we'll go through this quote one by one. So when they say sword, many people refer to the fires in Australia ravaging the country. When they say famine, they tend to think about the locusts, right, going through and eating all the crops, just like they'll have the same effect on the people in East Africa and the Middle East as they did in the Egyptian people during the 10 plagues. And then obviously pestilence, the coronavirus, plague. That's what coronavirus is. So all these events going on right now are all related to this quote in some stance, because even with
seemingly related,
right? Because we have sword, famine, and pestilence, and even more. It says, if we keep going and reading, it says that this death angel is given around 1/4 of the earth to ravage, right? And honestly, if we think about it, like if millions of people are starved, especially in India, right, takes up a large portion of our population. If in Australia, thousands of people have died, so it's become really big, and with all this stuff happening, so a lot of religious people are saying this isn't a coincidence. Like, this is going to be the end of the earth for 1/4 of our population. Is that true? I don't know. That's for you to decide.
People have also suggested climate change. National Geographic put out an article saying, or it was Time, saying the locusts were due to climate change. The Australian fires have been linked to global warming, according to scientists. And coronavirus is just a virus. So
that was linked to China.
There's 2 sides. Could be the Bible, could be global warming, could just be a coincidence that really sucks.
Yeah, of course. And of course the latter is the most likely. But
we'll see, though.
But obviously, it's just, this obviously has some huge biblical implications, and this is reason to freak out for people who are very conservative in their religion. So, speaking of disease, we're going to talk about coronavirus a little bit.
Give you a little update.
Yeah, so coronavirus, as per usual, is being an absolute annoyance to everyone, and it's forcing everyone to stay in their house. It's getting thousands of people sick, and thousands of people have died from it. Thousands of people are currently sick, so it's a lot. So we're going to start off by giving some updates. We're going to go through and just give updates from all over the world. This thing, I think, is a little funny. Over 100,000 bottles of fake hand sanitizer has been sold in southern India. Honestly...
That's crazy.
So there's a big market for fake hand sanitizer. And I guess you see that in the United States, too, with all these lines outside all these stores, like Costco and Walmart, and
hand sanitizer is way overpriced at this point.
Look, if people just, chill out a little bit, act a little more
sane,
a little more sane, and stop if they stop flooding the stores and buying all this stuff, then life can go on as normal. You don't need all this hand sanitizer, and the fact that you're buying fake hand sanitizer, like, shows just how desperate people are.
But when these people bought it, did they know it was fake?
Well, most likely not.
Yeah. Okay.
It just shows how desperate they are, though. That they don't know for sure it's real, but they just really want it to be real.
Yeah.
And so that's... if we just stop, as a population, if we're going to handle this issue correctly, we should learn to, chill out a little bit.
Chill out. Yeah.
Because life can go on as normal. These stores are not going to close. They're going to constantly restock their shelves. No need to worry. And then by selling at all these stores, you're giving these people who are actually very terrible people by selling fake hand sanitizer, taking advantage of this crisis. You're helping them make money by buying out stores of hand sanitizer because it makes people desperate. So maybe don't. And check your hand sanitizer because it might not be real. So don't pay, like 100 rupees for it if you don't know. Next, the Dow Jones is under 20,000. It has dropped under 20,000. That's really, really bad because it is now on par with what it was at the start of Trump's presidency.
So what does that mean? Can you, for the non-stock market literate people in the audience?
Yeah, so the Dow Jones essentially comments on the strength of the United States economy, and so the higher it is, that just makes it that means the economy is more stable, more firm, and it's just a stronger thing overall. And it currently is essentially where it was when Trump started his presidency, and he made record gains, right? Like it was huge, and of course it's very immature to blame the Dow Jones dropping on Trump because a lot of people have been doing that, but it's not just Trump's fault, right? It's everyone's freaking out over coronavirus. They're stopping their investments inside the market, and they're pulling out and they're selling stocks. So actually, after coronavirus is over, stocks are most likely going to shoot back up again. So if you're interested in stocks, now is probably the best time to invest.
That's time to buy.
Yep. So they're around Obama levels, essentially. And it's grown a lot, right? Like, it shot up thousands and thousands of points within 3 years. It's impressive. It was some of the highest growth rate in American history, but it's essentially all been reversed. But don't worry. It'll likely shoot back up when this is all over. No, it will shoot back up. The United States economy is really powerful.
It's like a roller coaster, though.
Yep. And the United States has passed many things in their Congress. Recently, they've passed an aid relief package, which gives $1,000 or more as financial lifelines for small businesses.
Kind of like Andrew Yang?
So a lot of people have been saying this is like Andrew Yang's freedom dividend. And we're just trying to stress it is not like Andrew Yang's freedom dividend. You might agree with Andrew Yang's freedom dividend, which is essentially, if you don't know, you give $1,000 per month to each family, household, or each person maybe. I'm not 100% sure. But a lot of people are saying what Trump has allowed to pass now is the same as Andrew Yang. And the difference is that what Trump is doing is temporary. They're giving out money because he's forcing people to stay home and not make money, whereas Andrew Yang is giving it out as a permanent thing. So you might agree with what Andrew Yang was doing. Like, we're not saying whether it's good or bad, but we are saying that what Andrew Yang wants to do and what Trump is doing were two different things.
Very different.
And yeah. So also, because of their criticism of the government, Chinese government, U.S. journalists from Wall Street, the Washington Post, and the New York Times were all required to hand in their passes for being critical of the Chinese government's response to the coronavirus. And obviously this was most likely in response, or so they claim, in response to Trump limiting the amount of Chinese media who can be present in the United States, which was something the Trump administration said in early March. But still, these are huge media sources, and despite Trump constantly criticizing and bashing these news sources, he has stuck up for them and said, that's not right. You're essentially shadowing what's going on inside of China. Although, speaking of China's actually hearing some good news for once. Really? Hospitals are starting to close down in China. They have yesterday...
that doesn't seem like good news.
Well, like coronavirus hospitals. Yeah. Because when the disease started and the outbreak started, the people literally banded together and built up hospitals specifically for that. So they're starting to close now. It's been over 24 hours since someone was diagnosed with coronavirus in China, which is huge.
That's great.
As far as I know, it's been way longer than that.
Yeah.
So that is good. China's nearing its end, and they were about...
I've heard concerns that these reports might be fabricated, though.
Yeah, of course they might be. But the fact is, China has been seeing a linear decline in coronavirus deaths and cases. So even if that isn't true, because China is a huge country, it might not be. But from what I've seen, it is true. But I can't confirm that for sure because I don't live in China. Yeah. But I guess we'll see. The fact is, China's getting better. And they're about 6 to 8 weeks ahead of the West, so ahead of here in the United States, ahead of
Right.
Europe. So we're expecting in like 6 weeks we're going to end up like what China is now. But coronavirus is starting to make its appearance in Africa.
Right.
So in the country of Burkina Faso and Western Africa, in the capital city of Ouagadougou, they have, which is a cool capital name, by the way.
Yeah.
A 62-year-old
Wow.
lady with diabetes has died. And that was the first death reported in sub-Saharan Africa. So we know it's starting to pick up over there. And it's likely in 6 weeks from now, it might look similar to how it is here because of how fast coronavirus spreads. Djibouti gets its first confirmed case of the virus. So that's nice. We're seeing Africa is becoming a huge problem. And just to update the statistics, 204,000 people have been cases have been seen worldwide. 8,250 people have died, and 82,500 people have recovered. So as we see, most people are recovering from it. Only 94% of the cases. 94% of the cases are considered mild, while only 6% are considered critical. So if you get coronavirus, most likely it's mild.
Unless you have underlying health issues and are above middle age.
Mm-hmm.
In that case.
In that case. But even then, there's still there's a little higher than average chance you're gonna live. Because again, if you look at it, only 8,250 people have died. That is a lot of people. That's bad. But at the same time, 82,500 have recovered. So you are most likely going to live if you have coronavirus. And because China has teetered out of the coronavirus scene, the WHO has declared Europe as the new capital and epicenter of the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all the updates we have for you on the coronavirus.
So unpredictable.
It's very unpredictable.
hard to teach.
Indeed. So, up next, we have our historical topic for today.
Ooh,
I know Ian was
exciting.
very excited about this.
Ah,
Yeah, so we are going to be talking about World War One. We're going to be talking about the causes and the Treaty of Versailles, which is what officially ended the war with Germany, and if it was fair to the German Empire, and if it caused World War II. So,
the sequel.
the sequel to World War One. More people were killed for terrible reasons. So, World War One causes.
Guess that's why sequels are worse. No, the original's always better.
No comment. Okay, so World War One. What were the causes of World War One? So we have obviously the main rivalry between the British Empire and the German
Maine.
Reich.
Did I just hear Maine?
The main rivalry.
My favorite acronym, Maine. Militarism. Alliances. Imperialism. Nationalism.
Yep, that's Ian's favorite acronym. And so this was caused by the huge rivalry between the British Empire and the German Reich, because the British Empire had such a powerful navy, it dominated the world, had the largest economy, it was extremely powerful. And Germany, of course, with warmongering Kaiser Wilhelm II, started to build up their navy and started to build up their submarines, and it created a ton of tension between the British Empire and Germany because of this aggressive expansionist
And
idea.
France.
And France. Yeah, of course, France was also there. But the main rivalry was, of course, between Germany and the British Empire, but obviously the French government had a desire for revenge to retake Alsace-Lorraine, which was lost in the formation of the German Empire. So we have that in the Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, we have ethnic divides in Austria-Hungary. So most people argue Austria-Hungary, technically started the war. Indirectly, Serbia started the war when the heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated.
Yeah.
But that is because there were ethnic divides in Austria-Hungary. Of Austria-Hungary, most people who lived in the empire were not Austrian or Hungarian. Most people were something else, and they wanted representation. And so that's where it all came in. Everyone wanted independence, like Ian said, nationalism in his acronym Maine. Nationalism was huge. Everyone wanted to rise up and make their own countries, and that's why we have the Balkans today with all these different states. But before that, we had the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and so there was a lot of that there. And obviously, Russia kind of saw that. They saw, look, we are the protector of all Slavs. We're gonna protect the Slavic people if Austria tries to oppress them. And so war starts to war slowly breaks out because Russia made a military alliance with France, and then Germany attacked Belgium, and when France declared war, Russia also declared war, and then because Austria declared war on Serbia, Russia's the protector of all the Slavs, so Russia declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary at the same time, and then France, because of the military alliance, also declares war, and then Germany pushes through Belgium, and Britain doesn't like that. No, they're invading neutral countries.
Belgium is neutral.
Because they're neutral, and so Britain joins the war, and all of a sudden you have this huge conglomerate of countries fight it. However, Germany has a little bit of an issue. They need oil. They need lots and lots of oil because they're...
And where does a nation go to get oil?
As per usual in modern human history, we go to the Middle East. And what do we have in the Middle East at the time?
Oil. The Ottoman Empire. That's what we have.
That's what we have. A big, sick man of Europe, as was referred to by the Europeans, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was absolutely in no position whatsoever to go to war.
No.
And this is where we're going to be focusing a lot of our stuff on today because the Ottoman Empire tends to be excluded when we talk about it. So we're going to talk a lot about the Ottoman Empire. They didn't want to join the war. They were broke. Their economy was in ruin. They got absolutely pummeled in war so many times versus the little Balkan states. They were pushed all the way back to their capital, Constantinople, which was still thought of as a time as Constantinople until 1930. And they were exhausted. Their military was incompetent. They had literally 5 years prior fighting wars, and they lost all of them. So they're no position to go to war. And so when war broke out originally, the Ottomans knew, okay, look, we might have to get involved in this because everyone's looking at us and eyeing us for our oil. We need to pick a side. So they reach out to the British Empire. And they say, British Empire, do you want to join us? Or can we join you? And the British said no. They're like, no, we don't really need the Ottoman Empire. We're good. Because we're really powerful. And so the Ottomans were like, ugh, fine. I guess we'll go to the Russians. We hate the Russians, but we'll go to them. So they go to the Russians and they say, Russia, you, me, against Germany. What do you say? And then Russia says, okay, all right, Ottoman Empire. You know what? We'll fight together. But Russia, of course, had some terms that the Ottomans had to agree to. And these terms essentially made the Ottoman Empire a protectorate of Russia. And that was extremely offensive to the Ottomans because they were Muslim and they were supposed to be like the protector of the Muslim world because they control cities like Mecca and Medina. So, they weren't all about that. So they said no. And then comes along Enver Pasha. He was a young Turk. The Young Turks were essentially a movement. It still exists today, but it's a little different from what it was then. The Young Turks were people who wanted more freedom and democracy inside the Ottoman Empire, and they rose up against the Sultan in 1909, I believe, and essentially almost restricted the Sultan to being a constitutional monarchy. But technically the Sultan still existed under Sultan Mehmed V during World War I. And so Enver Pasha, he was very, very passionate about bringing the Ottoman Empire into the war on the side of Germany. And that's a little different, right? Because the Ottoman Empire, we see them reaching out to the British and the Russians, but they never Germany because most people didn't believe in Germany. And
so the nation was pretty divided over who they side with.
Yeah, so the Sultan's court just didn't want to go to war. The aristocracy, they didn't want to because obviously the Ottoman Empire was on the brink of collapse and they didn't want to lose their position as nobility. Most people were anti-war because if you were a poor farmer living in the Ottoman Empire and you once again had to pick up your gun and go fight for this empire that keeps making you fight like 5 or 6 times in your lifetime, you're just absolutely sick of it at this point. But they did. The Enver Pasha decided we need to get the empire into the war. So he did, slowly. He started talking with German ambassadors, high-ranking German people. Actually, the Kaiser actually wasn't involved that much. This is mostly under the table, right? This is Enver Pasha, young Turk. He's really a high-ranking military officer in the Ottoman Empire, talking with some German officers over there because they're both trying to work together to get the Ottomans into the war. And so Germany decides to send some ships over to the Ottoman Empire because their eventual goal is to obviously attack Russia.
The Goeben.
Yep.
And the other one, I don't know the name.
And so I don't know either. And so these ships dock in Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. And because the Ottoman Empire at this point is neutral, according to international law, the ships cannot stay there for more than 48 hours.
And it was considered one of the British Empire's biggest blunder of losing the 2 ships as they got in the harbor. Churchill, who was First Lord of the Admiralty at the time, took a lot of that blame because they basically let it go through the Dardanelles and never come back out until they are rebranded as Turkish ships.
So, yes, they technically were rebranded as Turkish ships because in order for them to stay docked there, they had to be Turkish and not German. And so Germany decided we're going to quote-unquote sell these ships to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, like I said, is broke and had no money, but I guess we'll sell these ships, even though they couldn't afford them. And so everyone knew. It's like, everyone's like, Germany, come on.
That's a little fishy.
A little fishy, Germany. I know what you're doing. You just want the oil, and you want to build that pipeline to Baghdad.
I can see right through you.
Right through you. I know these Ottomans, they don't want to. I know the Sultan, he doesn't want to go to war. He wants to keep his position as Sultan. But you know what? It happens anyways. And eventually, the Ottomans under the Young Turks carry out bombing raids in southern Russia without the permission of the Sultan. Because again, the Sultan does not want to go to war.
Right.
And so bombing raids are carried out in Russia, and Churchill raids the Izmir coast, and eventually both Russia and Russia also carries out attacks on the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
So eventually, we're pretty much at war anyways. Britain declares war, and Russia declares war, and I believe November 6, 1918. You can check me online. And then the Ottoman Empire officially declares war.
1918.
1914. And
a little late.
A little late, yeah. And then the Ottoman Empire declares war on November 13th of 1914. And that officially brings the Ottomans into the war. Ottomans obviously proceeded to lose the war, and in 1923, their empire was abolished, and their capital was moved to Ankara, although they did defeat the British in their War of Independence. Their War of Independence was obviously...
When was that?
That was during the... That was in 1923, and that was when the British were occupying... That's when the British were occupying Constantinople, which was the capital of the Ottoman Empire at the time, right? And so, with the capital being occupied, the Turks were very angry and they wanted to get it back. And so they launched an attack on the British, and they actually surprisingly won, despite the fact they had no weapons and they were very broke. And they pushed the British out of Constantinople, and in 1930 it was officially renamed to Istanbul, and they pushed the British out of southeastern Turkey, and they created the modern-day nation of Turkey with Ankara as its capital. So, after the war, we have this Treaty of Versailles, right? This Treaty of Versailles, it's obviously a very controversial treaty. A lot of people argue it started the Second World War. And there's a lot of reason to think that, because to a very large extent it did. And so we're going to talk about why. So, we want to know, was it fair to Germany? In my opinion, this is obviously my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I do believe this was a fair thing to Germany. Germany was very aggressive. They were very imperialistic. They were attacking the British. They wanted war. Like Kaiser Wilhelm II really wanted war, and he was willing to literally sacrifice the entire country for it. But I can't stress this enough. Just because it was fair doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. Because I said the expression "eye for an eye" should not comply. It should not apply in this case, because it led to mass poverty in Germany, and it created the perfect conditions for the dictatorship under Adolf Hitler to form. And so that's kind of where it leads off, right? Like, we want to punish Germany, we want to get our land back, but is bankrupting the country and creating the perfect situation for nationalism the right thing to do?
I don't know. And the Allies were divided over this. French under George Clemenceau. I don't know how to say his last name, so pardon my French. He was called the Tiger at the time by his French constituents, and since Germany invaded France, killing thousands of French, they lost some of the most people in the war. He really wanted revenge against Germany, basically saying they should leave the border between French and Germany, which is that the Sudetenland or the Rhineland?
The border between France and Germany, the Alsace-Lorraine.
Yeah, they had to evacuate that. That became a demilitarized zone.
It was supposed to be
for 15 years. Then you have Lloyd George for the British, who took a more political view. His people wanted to punish Germany, but he was He's more lenient. He's kind of in between the spectrum of...
Yeah, France was the one that wanted to punish
Clemenceau, and then Woodrow Wilson. He's more idealist. He laid out his 14 points saying, we believe in democracy, all that. People should stop fighting. He was very cynical towards these European conflicts. Yep. He saw them as petty. So there's a spectrum between the big three.
Yeah, they're very divided. And Woodrow Wilson did obviously eventually sign off on the Treaty of Versailles, but a little fun fact, he went back to the United States, and the Senate actually rejected it. Right. So technically,
he also had a stroke, so he couldn't do much about that either.
So technically the United States never actually officially ratified the Treaty of Versailles and recognized it. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. But you can definitely argue that the Treaty of Versailles caused World War II. Obviously, this was very indirectly because the things that it led to caused World War II, like poverty and inflation. But its doing and the fact that it required Germany to pay up fines that they didn't have definitely laid the groundwork for World War II.
Also, the treaty has been criticizing for kind of sweeping Italy to the side. They didn't really pay much mind to Italy, who was an ally at the time against Germany, and they gave Japan land in China, which
that's true.
Made them more imperialistic.
Yeah,
China was not happy, and the invasion of Manchuria, some historians argue later, is the start of World War II, though that is contested.
Yeah, like 1932?
Right, yeah.
And that's another thing, right? Because by Japan getting all these islands that were in the Pacific Ocean that Germany was forced to cede, that obviously created a rise of Japanese imperialism, and the fact that the Japanese is the superior race, and so that created a lot of Japanese nationalism, as Ian said, and so that's another reason that this Treaty of Versailles could have caused World War II. Yeah, so I think that's very interesting to go into. If you have any more things you want to add to that, please feel free to leave it in the comments. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to this video.
Share this video.
Yep, and tell all your friends, because it means a lot when you guys give us feedback.
We're trying to grow as an account or a YouTube channel or podcast, so please share. Do us a favor. It takes 2 seconds. If you don't do it, I'll cry.
Yeah, and then I have to, calm him down, because Ian, he gets very sad. Not right now, Ian. Not right now. Okay. Okay, so we're going to end off by covering our recent polls. We had a lot of controversial polls. The 3 most recent ones were the necessity of labor unions in the 21st century, if feminism is needed in the West, and if the United States should lower its military budget. So, labor unions, are they necessary? 71% of you said they are, and 29% of you said they aren't. So, people who said they are, they tend to argue, obviously labor unions protect the worker. They're extremely important for making sure the workplace functions normally and essentially keeping loyalty to the company by the worker and make sure they're not mistreated and that they're covered if they hurt themselves at work. And all these things are that labor unions stem from is because people were abused and they were getting paid poverty line level wages. And then the people who said no tend to argue that labor unions are not as necessary now because the question was about the 21st century because of all these laws passed, like the minimum wage and workers' rights and all these different things. And labor unions tend to not allow... right now, a lot of people argue that, okay, if I want to join a union, I have to pay like $50 up front just to join, and then a bunch of my salary is given to the labor union. And people are like, well, why can't I just keep my salary? Why do I need this union to speak for me? Because the union keeps this separate bank account from like that 15% of your paycheck that you're paying in case you guys decide to go on strike for more rights. And then in that case, that 15% is distributed to you. But the problem is if you go on strike, that 15% is not nearly as much as that 85% that you're making when you could just be making 100% of your salary. Yeah.
A lot of people don't like the fact that unions sometimes force the laborers within a business to join, or otherwise they're ostracized among their colleagues and whatnot. Another criticism of unions is public unions and whether it's okay for public employees to be able to organize sometimes against the public interest. And one prime example in the 1910s was the Boston police strike, where Governor Coolidge basically said you cannot protest against public interest because the police were on strike in Boston.
This is true.
Later on, Reagan did a similar thing for unionized workers, air control pilots, because he said, you cannot protest. You're so vital to air travel and keeping passengers safe. It's not okay to unionize. Both Coolidge and Reagan actually helped the protesting workers to find jobs after they fired them. But those are two main criticisms of unions and now today. But obviously, as Josh mentioned, they protect workers and help pass regulations that keep them safe.
Yep. So, feminism. This one you guys had a blast with in the comment section. This is one of our more popular polls in a while. Feminism is always a very controversial topic, and of course we asked specifically in the West because obviously women it's undeniable that women's rights are issues in many countries in the world today.
Yep.
There are literally laws being passed to help women who do basic things. So, but in the West, that's where the controversy actually comes up. Is it actually necessary? 30% of you said, yeah, it's pretty necessary. Women are not equal. They talk about how they argue that abortion is a big part of the feminist community, and the fact that women can't just freely get abortions is infringing on their rights.
The wage gap as well, they point to, though that statistic is debated between those who say yes and no. But
yeah, so a lot of people are like, well, women... Yeah, the wage gap is very debated. So, essentially, women think, yeah, we still need equal rights. We're not fully equal. But the people who said no were very adamant about this, and they said, look, women are completely equal. The wage gap, it's not the most reliable source because they obviously women tend to actually a statistic is between the ages of 20 and 29, women actually end up making more money than men on average, and so the thing is there's more men CEOs, right? But women tend to go into a more parental part of their life when they go into their early 30s and their early 40s, and so they tend to not make as much money, if any at all, because they might stay at home, or they don't make that much because they want to work part-time to help with their children. Well, the dad does most of the work if they are a full family unit.
And those who see us might say that that's a systemic problem, that companies aren't paying women when they have children.
Yeah, exactly. So they want more paid leave for having a baby. So that is another argument. But a lot of people are saying, like, no, women just tend to leave and they don't make as much money because they tend to pursue their children and their safety and well-being over their career.
Right.
And so that's where all that controversy
There's also the criticism of the most recent wave of feminism, third wave feminism, and they see it as kind of toxic, that where before first wave was like about votes and second wave was about getting women in the workplace. Now that they all have that, where does the feminist movement go from here? And it's a lot of people see this new wave as kind of radical in their beliefs and sort of more militant.
Yep, and they point out things like how women are able to just take men to trial for rape cases, and they often win even if there isn't substantial evidence. And so people are saying, well, this like women essentially can do whatever men can do. I don't understand why that's not true. That's what people say, no, we're not stating our opinion on this. We're just giving the argument to both sides. That's all I have to say for feminism.
That's all I have to say.
Okay, so our third poll was if the United States should lower the military budget. Mm-hmm. So,
very popular as well.
Yep. So 60. Yeah, that was a really popular poll. Also, 65% of you said yes. 35% of you said no. So people who said yes, why should we lower the military budget? Well, why should we? Because the United States spends so much money. They spend way more than like the next 10 countries combined. Yeah. Something crazy like that, and they're saying that's not necessary. Why do we have to do that? That money could be better spent on social programs and helping the actual American people, and not on spreading American influence around the world in places where it's often not wanted.
Yeah.
And other reasons, I believe that's it. They just don't want to spend as much money.
I think it's ridiculous that Americans are spending so much when it's not really necessary and it's not helping the people.
Oh, yeah. And they also think the U.S. Army, some people, not everyone who thinks this, but a lot of people who voted yes tend to think the U.S. Army is inherently evil and they're imperialistic. And they
a
go...
lot of comments are like, the U.S. military is a terrorist organization, which is like...
Very, very controversial statement. And they go to places where they're not wanted. A lot of people point out things like Iraq and Afghanistan and how the United States shouldn't be there. A lot of people think that, many libertarians especially.
Yeah.
And they just think we should get out. I don't understand why we're spending all this money on these people. Yeah. And then 35% of you said no. Why did a lot of you say no? Well, the main issue is that the United States protects approximately 25% of the world's population, and the U.S. Army is very powerful, and that's a good thing because if the U.S. Army isn't the most powerful, then who is it going to be? China? Russia? Iran?
Yeah. We don't want that as a democratic nation. We often see ourselves as protecting against the evils of other nations, and we should maintain that place.
Yep, in the NATO alliance, the United States tends to be the biggest contributor to that. We are NATO. We provide approximately 50% of NATO's military assistance, although it's been going up a little bit recently due to the fact that the Trump administration has been pushing other countries to pay their fair share of the bill. But even then, the U.S. economy is just absolutely massive, so we are footing a large part of the NATO bill. If the military budget was lowered, then that presents a little bit of an issue. And also, our soldiers are very well paid. It's a very respectable career because it pays well.
They get so many benefits.
Yeah, and those benefits are only provided because the U.S. military budget is so large.
Yeah.
And veterans tend to not have not been treated as well as they could be. And so the Trump administration has really prioritized that and by trying to increase the military budget. And yeah, they're just trying to provide more.
People who say, no, just see the U.S. as an important place on the world stage that should be there as a strong military presence and should not lower its budget, which could increase risk and danger for other countries who want to see the U.S. Decline.
Yep. No one wants to see... A lot of people do want to see the U.S. decline, right? Obviously, militant groups like Iraq, like ISIS, and the Taliban, and the Hamas, and the Houthi rebels, and Iran. They all think the U.S. is very imperialistic, inherently evil. North Korea, they just want to see us go. So, that's all we have for you guys today. We hope you guys thoroughly enjoyed this. I know I enjoy doing this every single time we do.
I do too. And if you enjoyed listening, please consider donating or subscribing to us on Patreon. Be our first follower. You'll basically be the God follower. You get to ask us to do polls and everything.
Yep, $3 a month. Very cheap.
Yeah.
Not that much money. It tells us that you guys want us to keep going. You want us to keep recording these podcasts, and obviously it just makes our hearts warm when you guys donate to us.
Also, follow us on Instagram. That's where this all started. That's where we post our news stories, and that's where you could vote on our polls that we post.
And suggest new historical topics.
Yeah.
That's where we got the World War I suggestion from.
Yeah. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, please subscribe and share. We really want to grow and become popular.
Yep, and of course, look at us on Spotify as well, because you can download our podcast if you're on the road, and you can listen to it, and it won't take up any of your data, which is good, because I don't like when my data is taken up, because I don't have unlimited, so it's definitely nice for me. And just overall, please just give us any criticism. Please leave a comment. Please leave a like. Feel free to DM us. We always try to respond within a day to every single DM.
Or email us.
Or email us at rfax82@gmail.com.
Yep.
We always respond. We love seeing your emails. Criticism or not, it's all welcome. And that is about it. I hope you guys enjoyed this.
I did.
Yeah, I did. It's very fun. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and obviously the coronavirus, and the locust thing is very interesting.
Yep.
So if you have any more questions, you want to add something to what we said, because we didn't get every detail, because we definitely didn't, especially with World War I, right? There's so much going on there. Let us know.
Let us know.
All right.
Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.
And remember, coronavirus We'll get through it, everyone. Hang in there.